Tuatha, the people of the dawn. They had come from the east, and Ireland had never seen their like before. Their warriors were the bravest, their sages were the wisest, and the people the most beautiful that Ireland had ever seen. But the greatest, the wisest, and the most beautiful of them all was their leader, who they called the Dagda. And Dagda had many wonderful treasures in his house. He had tall tapestries twined with scenes of heroes hunting and great golden gauntlets set with glittering gems. But his most prized possession, the thing dearest to his heart, was his harp. And the Dagda would play his harp for the people. Sometimes he played a gantre, the music of dance and celebration. And just as the Dagda's fingers would dance across the strings of the harp, so the people would dance and be merry. Sometimes the Dagda would play the Goldthray, the music of the lament, and then the people would remember their lost loves, their fallen friends, their high hopes unfulfilled. Yet in remembering, they would honor these things. And then the Dagda would play the Swantre, the music of sleep and healing, and then the people would sleep peaceful sleep, dream beautiful dreams, and forget their sorrows. The Dagda also played his harp to change the seasons. In the spring, he'd play the quick tune of the melting snow and the rushing stream, and then the buds would burst from the banks, and the fields and forests would be filled with ferns and flowers. As the wheel of the year turned to the slow, lazy days of the summer, so the music would change to the sound of the ripening grain and the fattening fruit, until all the fields were golden and the fruit hung heavy on the bough. The wheel of the year turned again to the days of the autumn. The Dagda would play the sound of the falling leaves. And then bears would seek their dens, and squirrels would seek nuts to hide for the winter. And in those cold, short days of the winter, he'd play the cold, hard sound of the freezing stream and the falling snow. And then the people would stay in their houses, close to their fires, and wait to hear Dagda's spring song once again. Now the Tuatha weren't the only people in Ireland. The Fomorians had been there ages untold, and they were friendly enough at first, but they saw the many beautiful treasures of the Dedanan, and they became jealous. And at last they made war to take those treasures, and for many years the battles raged, first one side, then the other prevailing. Once during a battle in the winter of a year, some Fomorian fighters stole from the scene of the battle to the Dagda's house, and there they seized his harp and carried it back to the stronghold of their leader, Balor of the Evil Eye. The Dagda knew at once there was something amiss. There was such a strong connection between his heart and his harp. He rushed back to his house to find indeed his harp had been stolen. So he called all of his armies and allies together till they sieged the fortress of Balor. Many weeks that battle raged. But the Fomorian fighters were fierce and many, and Balor the giant with the evil eye was the equal of 100 men. So at last the Dedanan and their allies withdrew. The people came. "Oh, Dagda, it is time for our planting to begin, and still the snow lies deep in all our fields. It's up to a tall man's knees. You must get your harp back." So the Dagda sent his 7 spies to steal the harp. And they got into the fortress, they got into the very feasting hall. It was filled with Fomorian warriors feasting and carousing, and Balor in his giant chair, high on the wall, hung like a trophy there, was the harp. There was nothing they could do. The people came again. "Dagda, It is time for our harvest to begin, and the snow is deeper than ever. It's up to a tall man's waist. The streams are frozen hard as stone. The mills cannot turn. Dagda, you must get your heart back. Dagda, we are all starving. Now the Dagda had found he couldn't get his heart by force, nor by guile. Only personal courage would suffice to retrieve that instrument. So then he rubbed dirt on his hair and in his beard, and he threw a ragged cloak over his shoulders, took a staff, and he hobbled up to the gate of the fortress, disguised as a beggar. And when he got there, he knocked on the gate. And the gatekeeper let him right in. Remember, in these days there was a sacred law of hospitality, and whenever a beggar came to your house, you always gave them food and shelter for the night. So the gatekeeper led the Dagda into the feasting hall, and there were the warriors as before, and Balor on his giant chair, and there was the harp. And in his heart he called to the harp, and he began to dance on its peg until at last it flew from the wall and across the fire into his arms. The Fomorian warriors leapt to their feet. They seized their weapons to attack the Dagda. He began to play the gantry, and the warriors began to dance. They couldn't help themselves. And they danced so hard that they couldn't hold their weapons. They dropped them to the floor with a great clatter. And as the Dagda continued to play the merry strains of the gantry, the warriors began to laugh. And they laughed so hard, they themselves fell on the floor and kicked their feet in the air with mirth. And when they'd been laughing a good long time, he played the gold train. And these fierce warriors who were roaring with mirth one moment were now sobbing and weeping like little babes. Even Balor in his giant chair was weeping great tears that fell to the floor and flooded the fire. And then he played the swan tree, and he put them all to sleep. Then he carried his harp out of that place onto a high hill, and once there, he played the song of the south wind to call the springtime once again to Ireland.
O south wind, O gentle rain, you banish winter weather. Bring salmon back to pools again, the bees of